Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right.
Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to the Red Zone podcast. We are back after a little bit of a layoff. Spring practice is upon us. It starts tomorrow, bright and early at 8 a.m. It's time to talk about the 2018 season for the Badgers football team. I know a lot of you Wisconsin fans had a disappointing basketball season, but it just means you get to look forward to football a little bit earlier than you normally would, and spring practice is here, so why not? It's time to talk about it. Today we're doing a mailbag podcast. I'm going to take some of your questions that you sent in already. We'll have guests on throughout the spring. Basically, from now until the end of April, we'll have a weekly podcast throughout spring practice. So look forward to that. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play if you haven't already, and follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway for all the updates about the podcast and about the team from now until the end of spring. So we'll get right into the questions here. I already asked for some from you guys on Twitter and Facebook. The first one's from Bill_Woj at Slow_Creek. He asked, can you comment on Nick Thomas and Griffin Grady, and if you see them contributing this year? Now, I picked this one first because it's going to get me into, I kind of think we should go over, what might have changed on the roster between last year and this year, outside of the people you already knew were leaving. Wisconsin accidentally posted its 2018 spring roster online for just a few minutes at the end of last week. I can't remember. I think it was Friday, maybe Thursday or Friday. And I happened to stumble upon it at the right time, and during those couple minutes that it was up, and so I saw the new roster. Now, I will say that a UW official told me that it's not a finalized roster, so some stuff could still change. But I think, I think just looking at some of the stuff, there are a couple interesting things that that have happened, and some personnel changes that will be interesting to kind of look at as spring goes on. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because Bill asked about Nick Thomas, and he's one of the four guys that were no longer on the roster. So it looks like Nick Thomas, Peter Roy, Jake Whalen, and Blake Melke are no longer going to be with the team. They weren't on the initial spring roster that was accidentally posted. Now there'll be an official finalized roster released tomorrow and Tuesday when spring practice begins. So we'll get confirmation on those guys to see if they're actually for sure gone or not tomorrow probably. But yeah, Bill asked about Nick Thomas. So it looks like he might not be with the team any longer. Billy Hirschfeld's also leaving. That's something that I reported a couple days before, or actually it was right before I saw the new roster. I found out that Hirschfeld would not be coming back. So that'll be a big loss for the Badgers defensive line as well. He's a guy that didn't play a whole lot last year, but with your top three defensive ends leaving, I think it would have been good to have a senior like Hirschfeld in there that could be that could fill in and give you something. Position changes from what we saw for a few minutes. Arrington Farrar from inside linebacker, outside linebacker was the most interesting one. I think some people thought this might happen. He was the fourth inside linebacker for a lot of the year last year, but I think outside might be a little bit more of a natural position for him. He came in as a safety and even played as a true freshman in 2015. Now as a senior, he hasn't really been able to find a real comfortable home, and I think outside linebacker he's kind of continuing to grow and grow. It's why they couldn't keep him at safety. He was getting a little bit too big, and I think that we'll have to wait and see. I mean, he hasn't really made a huge impact yet. He's played. He played here and there at safety earlier in his career. He was the fourth inside linebacker last year and did get some playing time, especially when they had some injuries at that position last year. It'll be interesting to see if, with two starters gone an outside linebacker, to see if he can break into that rotation. I like a lot of the guys there. I think Andrew Van Ginkel is your only surefire starter, and you have Tyler Johnson and Zach Bond also competing with Farrar now, and maybe a couple other guys like Christian Bell and Paul Jackson, who's another guy who switched from wide receiver to outside linebacker. So there's going to be a lot of bodies there that are competing for those spots. So Farrar, being a senior, it's do or die time for him here, to try to be able to break into that lineup and be an impact player. Maybe he can put it all together as a senior. But we'll have to wait and see. And then the other couple position changes were Deron Harrell from wide receiver to cornerback, and Jake Collinsworth from inside linebacker to fullback. Harrell, they just need more guys at cornerback. I don't know if he's going to be, on the 2 deep this year. I think that would be really surprising if he was able to do that. Despite some of the young guys they have there, I think that they like the likes of, Madison Cone and Fayon Hicks and Caesar Williams enough where it would be difficult for Harrell to learn the position well enough to break in there this year as a top 4 guy at the position. But you need some depth there, and switching him from wide receiver where there's a ton of guys on the roster, it'd be even more difficult for him to break in at receiver, I think. So he's going to get his chance there, and then you had to expect somebody was going to move to fullback with with Austin Ramish leaving and not really bringing in anybody else. You have Alec Ingold there, and that was pretty much your only guy with Waylon not on the roster anymore. So Jay Collinsworth to move there, that ended up being the guy that they decided to try out at fullback. So we'll see if he if he can make an impact there or not. So that's kind of the news from the the roster portion out. Now again, this is not finalized, so we'll get an official roster tomorrow and to confirm all these changes and see if there are any others that weren't on that first one. So that's kind of where we are now. Sort of wanted to update you guys on kind of what we know from the roster last season to what we're expecting tomorrow when spring practice begins. So that's kind of stuff we have found out in the recent days. So back to Bill's question, kind of a long way of getting to Bill's question. He also asked about Griffin Grady, and he's a guy that didn't play last year. Played as a true freshman and then didn't play last year. So I think he's going to be sort of, with Farrar now at outside linebacker, he's going to be in the mix to compete for that number 4 spot on the inside. I think Mike Mascalunas might be the favorite right now to take that spot, but I think Grady is right there as well. Jack Sanborn's a true freshman that'll be coming in. That was a really highly ranked recruit. I think he was the highest rated guy in the Badgers 2018 class. So maybe he can work himself in there when he comes in the fall. But I think right now, Mike Mascalunas and Griffin Grady are your 2 most likely to compete for that number 4 inside linebacker spot. And maybe they decide to make that a 3-man rotation. Maybe they stick with Edwards, Connolly, and Orr and don't really give that 4th guy any time. But as we've seen before, the last couple of years, they've suffered a lot of injuries at inside linebacker. And even if they prefer a 3-man rotation with just those top 3 guys, all it takes is one injury, and a guy like Mike Mascalunas or Griffin Grady is going to be playing a lot of reps as the number 3 guy. So I think Grady could end up contributing. I think he's at least going to be a really good contributor on special teams. I think he'll play a lot of special teams, and he's going to compete for that number 4 spot. And if he gets it, he'll definitely get some playing time. If he gets beat out by a guy like Mascalunas or somebody else, then he's probably going to have to wait and see. Wait till next year. But again, TJ Edwards and Ryan Connolly are both seniors, and Orr's a junior. So I think even if he doesn't quite get too many reps this year, I think Griffin Grady will eventually work his way in there and get some playing time. But we'll have to kind of wait and see if that happens this year or not. All right, next question from Clayton Russell. He asks, is there anything different that our upcoming offensive line can do to play effectively in the run game against the likes of an Alabama defense, as an example, or against teams of that ilk? Will we be forced into a passing game? Now, the offensive line, they're returning everybody, and it was a good offensive line last year, a really good offensive line who had 3 guys who were in some kind of All-American honor. Now, it's going to be interesting to see if Michael Dieter moves back to guard. I think he will. Cole Van Lanen or Patrick Castle has to be ready to play at tackle if they do that. I think with another year in the program, at least one of those guys will be ready, and Dieter will be allowed to play in a more natural position. So they're going to have a little bit more depth. You would think they'd have a little bit more depth if Dieter moves inside and Van Lanen or Castle are ready. Then that pushes the likes of possibly John Dietzen as a reserve, and to have guys like John Dietzen, Caden Lyles, who a lot of people are excited about, Jason Erdman, and then either Castle or Van Lanen, whichever one doesn't start, to have those guys as backups is a big improvement from what they've had the last few years. Now, it was a really long process from when Chris took over to get this offensive line back up to where, Wisconsin is used to having it. I think in 2015 it was a little bit of a disaster. In Chris' first year, they were playing a ton of young guys. Guys weren't physically as strong as they needed to be, and they've kind of built it up over the last few years. And I think this past year it was back to being a Wisconsin offensive line that you're used to seeing. And I think this year it could be even better with everybody returning. Now, Clayton, you ask about if they can open up the run game against top defenses. Now it's always going to be difficult to do that against a team like Alabama or Ohio State, like they played in the Big Ten championship game. I think the biggest thing that could help that is if the passing game really hits its stride. Because if you have a really balanced offense, it makes it a lot more difficult for teams to come up and stack the box against you. Now, I think the passing game improved this year. I think Alex Hornibrook, for as much as he got criticized, I still think he had a pretty good year outside of, he turned the ball over too much, but I thought he had overall a good year. And they had a lot of young wide receivers who showed a lot of talent, and I think they're going to be even better next year or this coming year. So I think the passing game will improve too, and that might help a lot. Teams stacked the box against Wisconsin a lot last year. I know a lot of that has to do with formation. They play a lot of 2 and 3 tight end sets. If you have one wide receiver out there, teams are going to put 8 in the box against you. It's just the way it is. But I do think if you have the threat of the passing game a little bit, if you're more consistent with it, and teams have to worry about that more, that allows your offensive line. It gives them more of a numbers game. I mean, teams can't stack the box as much, and your offensive line, who's really talented, can win their one-on-one battles, and space is going to open up for your running game. So I think the offense as a whole is going to be better, and in turn, I think that they'll be better equipped to be successful on the ground against higher ranked teams, against teams that have some of the top run defenses in the country. Now, again, you play a team like Alabama or Ohio State or somebody like that, it's always going to be difficult to move the ball consistently and run the ball consistently. You can't expect to go out there against Alabama and just run the ball down their throat. Nobody does that. But I do think they're better equipped to be more balanced on offense and make it life more difficult on really any defense that faces them. And I have pretty high expectations for the offense this year, and I think the offensive line is going to be I think it's going to be really good, and we'll have to see exactly how good and if Dieter plays on the inside or not, but I do think that it's going to be great. This leads us into the next question. David Jurgensen at DC Jurgensen asks, could this potentially be the best offensive line ever? Now that's going a bit too far for me. Now I've only covered the team the last 3 or 4 years, so I wasn't here, for some of the great offensive lines in the past. But when you look at some of the lines in the, around 2010, 2011, when they had, basically 6 guys that eventually, got drafted to the NFL. They, it was the years they had Travis Frederick and guys like that. I still think that's hard to beat. I think that those lines are hard to beat. So there's a lot of great lines in Wisconsin's history. So to say this one is going to be potentially the best ever, I'm not ready to go there yet. If they get, we'll have to wait and see. Again, we could see the likes of Cole Van Lanen or Patrick Castle starting at tackle, and we haven't really seen them all that much yet. I mean, they played a little bit in the last couple of games of the season as sort of extra tight ends, blocking tight ends, or extra tackles out there in running situations after Xander Neville got hurt. But I think I'd like to see a little bit more of them before we say that this offensive line may be the best ever. I think it's going to be really good. Again, I think that obviously with all 5 guys returning from a really good line last year and having more depth than they've had in a long time, I think it's going to be great. But let's wait till the season starts and see how kind of at least see how the season begins and how dominant they are in the first few games before we take those big leaps. Let's see. Sconey at Badger Homer asks, do you see Aaron Cruikshank playing as a true freshman? And if so, do you think he will be more on special teams or receiver? That's a tough one to answer. Cruikshank's a guy that I know a lot of people are excited about him as a true freshman coming in. It does help him that he is enrolling early, so he will be here during spring practice and he'll be able to get in the program. I think that always helps guys who, want to play right away. If he's a receiver, though, I just don't see how he sees the field. There's so many. It's such a crowded position right now, and that's kind of where he projects. So we'll have to see if they try to find a spot for him. The top 4 receivers for Wisconsin right now, when you look at Quintez Cephas, Danny Davis, A.J. Taylor, and Kendrick Pryor, I don't think anyone's passing those 4 guys up. That's under them, and there's a lot of other guys competing for the spots behind those 4 too. So I don't necessarily think they're going to burn a red shirt on Cruikshank just for him to play special teams or just return kicks. Maybe I'm wrong about that. To be fair, that this coaching staff has shown that if they feel a guy can help them, that they're not afraid to just not redshirt somebody. I think that if they feel like somebody can help them even in a fairly small way, they're comfortable, as long as the kid is comfortable too with going ahead and playing them in a limited role. But if I had to guess right now, I'd say that he probably ends up redshirting. Now, I don't really know a whole lot about how talented this kid is. There's a lot of hype surrounding him right now. It's hard to tell sometimes on those high school highlight tapes, how good a player, how much it's going to translate, how good a player is going to be right away, how ready they are for the college level. So let's wait and see. Let's watch him during spring practice, see what kind of reps he gets, and then watch him in fall camp and see, if he's getting the reps, how much the coaching staff feels like he's ready to play right away, and if he's taking reps at the return positions as well. So, it'll be interesting to see. I can't really see him getting too many reps at receiver this year. Maybe he proves me wrong, but. And we'll have to see if he's. I think if they burned his red shirt just to be a special teams return guy, he would have to be sort of head and shoulders above everybody else as a returner, and maybe that'll be the case. But they could use some help in those return areas. I think they're looking for guys, especially with Nick Nelson leaving at punt returner. You got to find somebody else there. I think Danny Davis is a candidate as well, but. Nick Nelson was the only guy that returned a punt all season last year for this team, so you got to find a new guy there. A.J. Taylor on kickoffs was hot and cold. He did fumble a couple times, and that was a concern. So they could use some help in the return game. So we'll have to wait and see if the coaching staff feels like he's ready to go. I know there's a lot of hype around Cruikshank, but not having seen him at all, it's really hard for me to say, that guy's going to play as a true freshman. Let's see. Next question. With Billy Hirschfeld leaving the football team, who steps up to give defensive line depth? That's a really good question. You're also losing your top 3 defensive ends in Chikwe Obashi, Connor Sheehy, and Alec James. So those guys have been around the program forever, and so suddenly you're kind of resetting there. Isaiah Laudermilk has a chance to have a really big breakout season. Obviously, he played really well in limited reps last year. Got a little bit more of a chance when Chikwe Obashi was out for about half the season, and I think he played really well. I've been impressed with him since I saw him in developmental workouts the December of his redshirt year, and thought he would be a really good player. So I think he's going to have a really big season. And Olive Sangapolu comes back at nose tackle one more year. The big question is Garrett Rand. Does he switch to defensive end? Now on the accidental posting of the roster a few days ago, he was still listed as a nose tackle. So we'll have to see if they eventually move him. I thought they would. I thought it was logical for him to go ahead and move to end. They had obviously there's they need help at defensive end. I think it kind of depends too if Bryson Williams is ready. He's a true freshman that's coming in who can play, who's going to be a nose tackle who a lot of people are excited about. He's enrolling early, and if he's ready to go and he can serve as your number 2 nose tackle, then that gives you a little bit. It makes it a little easier to move Rand out to defensive end, not needing him to play as your second nose tackle. But I think Rand could also start at defensive end and also fill in at nose tackle if he needed to, if something happened to Songapolu, and they could shift stuff around then. But we'll have to see if that happens. I know, it seems like Rand might be a more natural end, but I think they also like what he did at nose tackle this year. So after those 3 guys, though, you have a bunch of guys that haven't played hardly at all, and this is going to be a position. I think the defensive backfield is getting a lot of attention as far as, are they going to be able to replace their guys? It's probably the biggest concern on the team. The cornerback position, at least, is the biggest concern you can find with this team right now. After Dante Carey-Williams, you don't know who's going to we don't have any evidence of people, after Carey-Williams stepping up at cornerback. But the defensive line is sort of the same thing. They could end up with a starting 3 that you feel really good about, but then after that, it's a bunch of guys that just haven't played. And I'm pretty excited about Keldrick Preston. He's a guy that I think has only played in 1 game. He's going to be a redshirt sophomore this year, but he's another guy that I've been in bits and pieces, impressed with during the practices I've seen. The trouble with kind of projecting young guys too is, you watch these practices during spring ball and fall camp, and a lot of times, especially during fall camp, these young guys aren't getting that many reps anyway, because they're not in the 2 deep yet. They're not kind of pushing for playing time, and some of the younger guy practices aren't always open, that we don't get to watch practices during the season. So a couple years ago, we got to see some of the young guy practices in December, and he's one of the guys, along with Laudermilk, that really stood out. So the sample size on these guys, are pretty small, even for us in the media who get to see some of the practices. It's still guys you don't know a whole lot about, but I do like what I've seen from Preston. Craig Howe's another guy that hasn't played much, but could step in there and get some reps. There's a few other guys too. Who could potentially, I think they're going to try to give a lot of guys reps in spring and fall camp and kind of see what happens and see what they've got. You're going to be again with Hirschfeld gone and those other 3 defensive ends gone. You're gonna be seeing a lot of guys that you haven't heard a lot about. So I think they're going to have to use this offseason to see which of those guys are ready and develop as much depth as they can and see. It'll be interesting to talk to Inoki Brechterfield, the defensive line coach, and kind of see where he is as far as how many guys he feels comfortable with right now if they were to have to play a game with these guys. Maybe some of these guys they like more than we think. Maybe they feel really good about these guys, but it was just such a crowded position with all those seniors last year that they didn't get a chance. So we'll have to wait and see. Maybe a couple of those guys step up, but I think finding depth on the defensive line will be a bit difficult. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Let's see. We got one more here, a little bit off topic. Badger Rock at King Rock 711. Excuse me. He asked, would love to hear you compare Alabama to Wisconsin as far as culture and game day experiences, fans, etc. Yeah, it is quite different. I think at Alabama, I think just in sort of that area of the country, it's sort of a little bit more of a lifestyle. The college football is just, it kind of gets unhealthy at times, just how much people really are into college football and how much they care about it. And so I think at SEC stadiums, you might be more likely to see, that the stadium fill up, an hour and a half before the game. I'm not saying that happens every single game, but I think the fans, I think people revolve their lives around college football down there more than people do up here. But that's not to say that the Wisconsin fans are any less, I think the Wisconsin fans are still really passionate. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the student section not filling up, and some of that is the students' fault, and some of it's the procedure for letting them in, and there's a lot of reasons for it, and I think they're trying to fix that. I don't think that's a good representation of how good the Wisconsin fan base is. I think it's a great fan base up here. I think there's a lot of passion for the team, and it's just not as much of a do or die, controlling your life if the team wins or loses type of mentality, which is, again, it's a lot healthier up here than it is down there. So that's a little bit different. As far as the game day, the true game day experience, I went to some Alabama games and some other SEC games as a fan back in my early college days. Haven't really done that here. The Wisconsin games I've covered, I haven't actually attended a game outside of covering the game. So I haven't sat in the crowd and experienced that, and I haven't tailgated, things like that. So it's hard to know exactly how that compares. I haven't really, walked around the tailgates here at Wisconsin and kind of been engulfed in that. So it's a little bit difficult to compare that a little bit. So yeah, I guess the experiences have just been different for me as well. Being a student in Alabama versus, just being a journalist covering Wisconsin's football team. That makes it pretty different too. So the experiences are sort of different in that way for me as well. But it's interesting. I think every place is a little bit different. So you just kind of have to experience it yourself and see what the differences are. Well, thanks for all the questions, guys. I really appreciate you guys sending those in, and it's good to be back with the Red Zone this year, and keep following our coverage as spring practice progresses. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Google Play, and follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway, and follow our coverage on madison.com as well. I will talk to you later.